morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 154 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I've got my regular co-host, Carlo Parcelli, from Washington, D.C., and it is noontime there. I was about to call it Satan's Anus, and something about the butcher floor or the cutting floor.
The killing floor.
Killing floor. There's different euphemisms we use for Washington, D.C., of course. And then our special guest today is Max Parry, great journalist. He is streaming live from Baltimore, Maryland. It's noontime there as well. So our title today's program is What Money Can Buy, War, Genocide, Pedophilia. What this title brings to mind is a little bit of a change in the establishment efforts to justify and sell and wrap up all of their policies in neat language of human rights, democracy, freedom, justice. You know, this is kind of how the whole Cold War played out. And the U.S. would, try and sell all of its evil, aggressive, genocidal policies in, the box of freedom and democracy, etc. Because we were obviously fighting a great evil, and so it was necessary to defeat this evil, and so anything we did to defeat this evil was necessarily good. But these days, that really doesn't make sense to anyone. And they're not even really trying to sell and wrap up their policies in nice language. So with now the pedophilia, now they're not openly embracing pedophilia, but at the same time they're clearly obstructing people's ability to have transparency with regards to Epstein. And so it seems very egregious, and it seems very in your face, which is different from how the entire Cold War played out. And then of course we got the genocide in Gaza, where we are enabling, perpetuating, continuing an actual genocide, and there's very little about it in the press. And again, it's just so blatant, and they're not even trying to to sell it to us, right? They're just kind of ignoring it and allowing it to continue, but not even talking about it, which is bizarre. So okay, thought experiment. So like what would happen if China, for instance, was engaged in a similar genocide in Xinjiang? Would the press be as quiet, as silent as they are with regards to the Gaza genocide?
Well, I sense that that's a rhetorical question, Billy Bob, but yeah, I mean, I think that they've actually even, in regard to the supposed Chinese persecution of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, I mean, they're not even trying with that anymore. I mean, it's pretty much impossible to wage that kind of propaganda campaign when you have a live streamed, actual genocide, where the evidence is right in your face in real time of Muslims being slaughtered, and Christians as well, but Muslims being slaughtered with the American, taxpayer paid for weapons by the Israelis. I mean, they pretty much know that's going to land flat. And, I don't really even see too many people trying to sell the Uyghur genocide. I mean, the whole thing was that they were, rounding them up and throwing them in concentration camps and all this stuff. Meanwhile, there's numerous other Muslim sects that in China, like I believe it's the Hui people, that have had no issues. Much of that is clearly related to the fact that the United States and its allies like Saudi Arabia, with the deliberate spread of Wahhabism, there was fomenting of fundamentalist terrorism in that region, as they did in many other parts of the world. And in some respects, it was, kind of blowback for China, speaking of this podcast's title, because they had actually, China, believe it or not, had actually supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which is sort of one of several disastrous foreign policy moves they made after the Sino-Soviet split, in my opinion. But clearly this is Western instigated terrorism, but China's largely gotten that under control because they've done a lot of outreach, and they're not just combating against the terrorism. They've done a lot to win over the Uyghur population, and it's well documented. There's tons of journalists, Western journalists, mainstream journalists who've gone over there, and this whole idea that Uyghur Muslims are being abducted and thrown in prison is just simply categorically not true. I mean, sure, they have had institutions to help form to like re-educate them and help them, to sway them away from. I mean, there's been a lot of. The fact that terrorism is spread there, it shows actually how pretty lenient they are in terms of religious restrictions, because in order to convert people to something like Wahhabism, you have to have madrasas, indoctrinating people who are vulnerable to this kind of stuff. And it was a big problem for years. I mean, there was all kinds of terrorist attacks, knife attacks, bombings and whatnot. And it's largely gone down. China's done a very good job combating that. I suppose that there is some discrimination. I guess I'm willing to accept that, but even that I haven't really seen much evidence of, because again, there's other sects of Islam that have had no issues whatsoever. But I mean, getting back to your point, like obviously, if China was doing anything on the scale, I mean, the fact that, what consequences has Israel really suffered for what they're doing? I mean, it's just, it's so night and day. I mean, the difference between them. I mean, and the media is having an incredibly difficult time covering for Israel's ass. They just can't do it anymore. The tide of public opinion, even within the Republican Party, which I never thought would happen, has turned against Israel. I mean, I remember in 2014, that assault on Gaza, obviously it pales in comparison to what's being done now, but that was pretty brutal in its own right. There were hundreds of children killed, thousands of people. But U.S. Public opinion polls at the time, I remember, held firm in American support for Israel. And that's not the case anymore 10 years later, or over 10 years later. And I never thought that would happen. Or at least I wasn't ever sure that this kind of like South Africa-like moment where Western public opinion is finally turning against Israel, including among conservatives, and they're clearly in panic mode with, the criminalization of protest and dissent, making Palestine Action, in the UK, like bringing members of Irish rap groups up on, terrorism charges for waving a Hezbollah flag that somebody threw up on stage. This is like, they're clearly in panic mode. They know the Hasbara is not working anymore. And so, obviously, in response to your question, no, of course, if any country was doing, Russia, I think, I don't know what the official numbers on the amount of children that have died in the Ukraine war, obviously not on purpose. The coverage of that, when Russia has hit a bomb near a single hospital, when in contrast with Israel, who've deliberately wiped out every hospital in Gaza, there's no comparison. I mean, the propaganda machine is breaking down, and I think now with this Epstein thing, people are starting to become aware of the very sinister other aspects, like how deep this rabbit hole goes as far as like Israel's blackmail of the entire American government. I mean, I think it runs so deep that, I think Israel, in some respects, probably has blackmail on the U.S. government going all the way back to the Kennedy assassination, as far as like nefarious stuff, the deepest, darkest secrets of the American government. And I think that Israel has been blackmailing the U.S. government for a long time, not just sexual blackmail, but blackmail in regards to its own crimes, including taking out one of its own presidents and allowing terrorist attacks to happen on its territory as well. I think that Israel is, of course, if you suggest stuff like this, you get called an anti-Semite, but, I think it's pretty hard to ignore. And something like the Epstein case, it's clear as day, and this is bipartisan. I mean, they knew what was going on. They've covered up for it. He was protected by the media for over 25 years. I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but when you've got him close with Ehud Barak, and also the president of the United States, Bill Clinton, at the time during the Camp David Accords, who knows what kind of effect the sexual blackmail could have had on those negotiations. I mean, there's even people who say that Bill Clinton was being blackmailed by Israel over the Monica Lewinsky scandal, or that even she was some kind of honeypot. But no, I think that the control that Israel has over the U.S. government, of course, it's not purely that. I'm not one of these people that says that it's not a two-way street. I do think that their interests diverge at some point, and that that Israel is largely also an imperial proxy. But I do think that the relationship is symbiotic, and one of its primary mechanisms is the fact, the inordinate level of control that Israel has versus other allies is, has to be accounted for. And I think that it is related to both, obviously the bribery of Congress with the Israel lobby, but on top of that, I think that there's clearly, with their very sophisticated intelligence agency, blackmail at the highest levels of the U.S. government. And this stuff is all, and I also think that the Epstein scandal, Trump has faced numerous scandals in his tenure, and I think that this is the one that could actually potentially bring him down, because I think that he would make the perfect fall guy, if they want to, because everyone's implicated in the Epstein thing. It's bipartisan, and they've been looking for an excuse to get rid of Trump for a long time anyway. And it seems pretty obvious that he is on the list, if there is one. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's sort of made the fall guy for that. And the fact that his own base, he's turned them against him rather foolishly. I think that there's this is not going to go away, and it's very much interrelated with, it might appear separate, but what's going on with Epstein and what's going on with the genocide, I think, are very much, and the collapse of American empire in general. I think this is all wrapped up, and it's coming to a head.
I don't know. I had so many thoughts, Max. There were so many things I wanted to say, but I will ask Carlo if he, or not. I had a few things to say, but I didn't want to monopolize.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I had many things to say too.
I know. I gotta pick one. So, okay. So, South Africa lacked the kind of leverage that the United States, that Israel has, within the United States. There was a South African lobby, just like there's a Ukraine lobby, but it was not as powerful as the Zionist lobby, the pro-Zionist lobby. And so, when it was unconscionable and you know, the West realized they could not make a consistent moral case for continuing to support South Africa. You know, we said, hey, it's done. We're gonna do this. You know, we're gonna let the ANC. You know, you guys. You know, it's gonna be a big change, and it was, of course, the right thing to do. But it was because, you know, there wasn't just this tremendous South African lobby that has as much power as the pro-Zionist lobby, which again transcends Jews, right? It's Christian Zionists. It's also, you know, Zionists who happen to be Jewish that, you know, are around the world, you know, influential and you know, prioritize Israel over everything else. You know, I think it was Haim Saban that says, I'm a one issue guy when it comes to politics, and my issue is Israel. So, you know, for that reason, you know, you would think that the United States would, you know, just drop Israel, because, you know, like Mearsheimer always says, it's a big albatross around our necks. But, you know, it's impossible to do, because, you know, there's way too many powerful forces wanting to maintain and support it. And like you said, it's not just about blackmail, right? It's not just about blackmail. You know, Israel does, you know, allow the United States to force its will on that very important resource-rich area. And I mean, all these Gulf monarchies would collapse. The Kingdom of Jordan would collapse. The dictator in Egypt would collapse if Israel was not a strong, powerful player in the region. And so, you know, there's definitely an overlapping of interests, but at some point, you know, it's just it's becoming too difficult for the West to justify and to make a coherent case about why they're doing what they're doing and why they need to do it. And so it's just like, yeah, they just stopped trying. But Carlo, did my ramblings spur any kind of
it did. The mention of South Africa is interesting to me because with Palestine, because on the one hand you have the U.S. History of slavery, and then you have the universal history of anti-Semitism to deal with. You have both of these, and what I remember from the Chester Crocker years, when they were trying to, when there were efforts made to weak efforts by the U.S. to help rid South Africa of apartheid. Still, the U.S. media, for example, when they began to lionize Nelson Mandela, but the one thing they didn't point out about Nelson Mandela was his principle. He was not. He could have been released from prison years before the 26 years he served if he agreed to renounce violence by the ANC. He wouldn't do it. That's a level that's beyond the ken of any mainstream U.S. media. Beyond, you can forget that. They don't have that kind of courage. I'm not saying I would either, but they don't for sure. And then that goes back. That also ties in with the fact that in the U.S. there was a huge move on the part of civil rights and the civil rights of African Americans. Now, that all fed into the apartheid in South Africa being nullified. You couldn't get the same thing. Well, interesting to me, you couldn't get the same thing with Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and Mugabe, who spent 30 years in the bush fighting the Rhodesian government, with a heinous government. They couldn't get that because he was seen as being a Marxist out on the loose. But the Holocaust, as it relates to anything Israel, anything to do with Judaism, not Zionism, but Judaism, and by and large, you have to wear that you have to wear that down. You have to do something to nullify the validity. I mean, it's obviously the Holocaust occurred, no doubt about it. It was terrible. Now the very people, and this is what's so poetic about it, if you want to talk about it that way, the very people that were victims, the ancestors of the victims of the Holocaust, at least the Ashkenazi that are now in Israel, are now the most virulent supporters of a genocide that was just like was done on them, and that to reconcile after so much ink has been spilled on the Holocaust and the nature of it and the nature of the German people and during that time and all of that, how you begin to turn that is I think vital to understanding what's going on and how to end it. And I don't see any force out there powerful enough to stop this truly awful situation, just awful situation. And that comes back to the distinction of where money plays in, where wealth plays in. I mean, even with Trump, the Adelsons gave him what, $180 million or something, some huge amount. So anyway, that's best. I see that.
I mean, this seems like the plan. I mean, they were going to get Trump, as president, and then he was going to enable and facilitate, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the creation of Greater Israel. So to me, like, I mean, I kind of saw that before the election, the anti-Trump virulency receded quite a bit. And I know, from watching, Zionist media, they were really excited about Trump, and they thought Trump is, on their side completely. And, in a way, to an even greater extent, of course, than the Democrats were. And so, and then the hundreds of millions he got from his Zionist benefactors. And I mean, so I think what's playing out right now is the plan, at least, according to Netanyahu and, many of the powerful players. But the question is, are they going to succeed? Because, I mean, again, what they want to make, Gaza uninhabitable. They want to eventually, just, build the great Trump Gaza Trump Gaza Riviera. And I mean, he will get plenty of credit. He will have statues, he will have things named after him. I mean, this is the hope. And my hope is that it doesn't pan out. My hope is that it fails and that humanity unites at least on this issue and says absolutely not. But it's an open question as far as what can happen. I mean, it's nice to see certain governments taking a critical stance, at least rhetorically, but it's like lip service. It's like they're just they see that people are angry, and so they're giving lip service to get political support. But what are they actually doing? Are they actually going to be able to do anything? What do you think, Max?
Well, yeah, I mean, I saw France is supposedly going to recognize a Palestinian state or something. I mean, they're making these very superficial. I mean, obviously that's a good thing, but they're not doing what a country like Colombia is doing, for example. I mean, they're in damage control, and they realize that this is getting worse and worse. And I'm a little bit more optimistic than Carlo in that, although and even what you were saying as far as like about South Africa, that because Israel has a very powerful lobby, that it's a different situation. And obviously, I think in the U.S.'s case, they probably weren't as personally invested in maintaining South African apartheid. I mean, I don't know. I'm not really an expert on the history of South Africa, but my understanding is that, like the British were at least much more intimately interested in maintaining that, but I could be wrong. I mean, I don't want to. I'm sure. I mean, I know the U.S. shored up apartheid the exact same way, but I do think that at the end of the day, despite how powerful its lobby is, Israel is entirely dependent upon foreign aid, especially American aid, and if it becomes such a toxic PR disaster to where on both sides of the aisle, where a politician cannot maintain support while supporting what Israel is doing. Israel is just like Frankenstein, run out of the laboratory. It's doing everything. It's not like it's doing anything to help these politicians that are supporting them maintain this image of being the only supposed democracy in the Middle East. They're doing everything possible to. They have killed and they have destroyed their reputation. Completely destroyed any semblance that they are at all the way that they've been portrayed for the last 75 years as the only democracy in the Middle East. They have completely destroyed that image. Obviously it was everyone who was really in the know knew that was never the case to begin with, but it's impossible to ignore. It's impossible for them to maintain that image anymore, doing what they're doing so out in the open. And they don't care. They think that it's a very irrational, Israel is committing suicide. It is committing suicide. And as far as what Carlo was saying about, how it is true that, the Ashkenazi Jewish population that mostly makes up Israel, whose ancestors were, yes, the victims of the Holocaust, are now the biggest proponents. Poll after poll shows, over 80%, I think, of Israelis support the complete ethnic cleansing of Palestinian territories. The example I don't know if you guys have ever seen the documentary Defamation from 2009, but that's really worth seeing because it gets into the sort
psychology.
of internalized pathology where the Jewish diaspora, not just Jews in Israel, are really there's like this collectivized trauma that's instilled through Zionism, especially as an ideology that sort of internalizes this victim mentality that allows the sort of suspension of morals where they can do what they're doing in Gaza using something like the Holocaust as justification, and also where they are given this supremacist position even within the Holocaust itself. There's a fascinating part of the documentary where actually there's like a delegation of this is in like 2009, I believe. So it was a delegation of the Ukrainian government visits the head of the Anti-Defamation League, and they're having a discussion about the Holodomor versus the Holocaust. And when the Ukrainian delegation starts comparing the Holodomor to the Holocaust, the head of the ADL is like, oh, no. Don't compare the two, because we have, it's this idea that, that they are these especially persecuted victims, and that gives them, carte blanche to just do whatever, even if they're doing the very same thing.
And it's like
that the Nazis did to them.
They resent any efforts of empathy. It's like, no, you can't empathize with me. Because the poor Ukrainians like, hey, we get it. We suffered too. No, you didn't. You didn't suffer at all. Nothing like us.
And then the most incredible thing about that documentary is, they actually go, this ADL delegation, they go to the Baba Yar site of the Baba Yar massacre in Ukraine, which of course was committed by Ukrainian nationalists in collaboration with the Nazis. And then, it's not mentioned in the documentary, but the Yushchenko government gave the Order of Ukraine to posthumously to Bandera, who was the one that did the the Babi Yar massacre. So like that documentary, I really recommend to people because you could see how schizophrenic both the Zionists and the Ukrainian nationalists are in their worldview and their psychology, and how in denial about their own history and everything.
So, and that was one of the thoughts I had during your initial talking points. What's clear is that you're not going to condemn Hamas. Fine, Max. You don't want to condemn Hamas. I get it. But no, I was thinking of Piers Morgan. Like, they've lost Piers Morgan. And I mean, when you lose Piers Morgan, it's not looking good. I mean, he's still such a fucking, so many expletives I could use to describe Piers. But to his credit, he there's an aspect of his shtick on his program that I appreciate because
at least he has all kinds of. I mean, the fact that he gets Shmuley Boteach and Norman Finkelstein on to debate each other. I mean, what mainstream show is even allowing that kind of debate to happen? So yeah, I hate Piers Morgan too. I think he's a piece of shit. But he is. I mean, I don't know. Like, obviously, he's seeing the writing on the wall. Like, what Israel's doing, this is just not defensible. I mean, he's a horrible person, but I do think that his show at least is providing a forum for, I mean, the fact that this is going on and there are not debates like that happening on mainstream television, which is exactly what the Western public needs to see. They need to be hearing the Palestinian perspective and also showing. I mean, he also has the most unhinged Zionists who try and excuse this stuff. So people can see them for what they are. I mean, the mainstream media really goes out of its way to hide, the openly pro-genocidal statements by people like Smotrich and all these Kahanis. What's the guy that's the former nightclub bouncer who was the defense minister? I can't remember his name. Lieberman, Avigdor Lieberman. All these lunatics, who make these statements. We need to wipe them all out. No baby is innocent in Gaza. I mean, the mainstream media, they go out of their way to not report that.
No, for sure. I also wanted to endorse your the documentary called, what was it called again?
Defamation. Yeah.
Defamation.
Pretty good.
So yeah, I saw that years ago. It was very informative, and I wanted to just mention, it's this indoctrination. It's this Zionist indoctrination that puts certain parameters, really tribalistic parameters in people's heads and people's minds, where they really believe, that Jews are eternal victims and that non-Jews can't be trusted and that non-Jews always have this irrational Jew hatred, which will manifest itself. And so this is why Jews need their own state. Like it's just so obvious to them. And then when this Jewish state has the most moral army ever, and they get attacked, and then their self-defense, these non-Jews accuse their self-defensive efforts of being genocide. I mean, what more proof do you need that non-Jews are irrational Jew haters? Like, what more proof do you need than the claims of the International Criminal Court that Israel is engaged in a genocide? This is the kind of defamation that just solidifies in these people's minds that they're absolutely correct and that they need a state to be strong and powerful. And it is really this us against them mentality.
Yeah,
and,
it's a very
it's a zero sum. I'm sorry. A zero sum us against them mentality, and that is what results in these kinds of extremist behaviors and policies, which who knows where they're going to end.
Yeah.
All right, you were saying something when I was rambling.
I was just going to say that you're perfectly describing the sort of circular reasoning and logic or lack thereof behind their worldview. It's just this auto reinforcing, self-reinforcing totally just this Manichaean worldview it's just they can't. It's a totally blinding form of indoctrination. I mean, it's it's a um, it's a very dangerous ideology, and you can see why. I mean, again, their society, Israeli society, from day one, they're indoctrinated, and the fact that they have mandatory military conscription. Yes, I know that there's a very marginalized section of Israeli society that resists this, but it's not visible. I there's that Abby Martin episode, I believe it was of the Empire Files, where she goes there and she's interviewing whole crowds of people and talking to people on the street, and just the way that every day the racism and the bloodthirst of the average Israeli citizen, seemingly, is just totally out in the open. And I know that when Israel was formed, there was some pretense that it had a left-wing aspect to it, and in its collectivist nature with the kibbutz and whatnot. But any sort of tiny microscopic particle of that, if there ever was any, is completely gone. I mean, it is an ultra right-wing fascist regime. And Zionist socialists, were really using, if anything, just using something like socialism as a cover, for their, equally genocidal aspirations in terms. I mean, there was never any attempt to make a binational state for Jews and Arabs. I did some research recently for another article that I was working on, where I was reading the Zionist socialist philosopher Martin Buber, if I'm saying his name correctly. And, he was one of these Zionist socialists, who on paper was arguing for equality between Jews and Arabs. But there was an implicit racism still there, that we have divine right to this land. Any left-wing pretense that Israel had, that unfortunately, like the Soviets, fell for back in the day, and much of the left around the world fell for, that was totally a cover, and it was a work of deception. And Israel now is just a totally fanatically right-wing, ultra-nationalist, ethnically supremacist state with no redeemable qualities whatsoever, and there really is no left there. And if there is, it's complete. It has absolutely no political influence whatsoever.
So, there's a big debate about, does Israel control the United States? Does the United States control Israel? And I mean, there's so many angles with that. But let's take John Mearsheimer's, allegation that Israel is an albatross around the United States' neck, and the United States just needs to let Israel, go and stop supporting it. Wouldn't that be bad for the U.S. empire, right? Because, I mentioned before how that would probably lead to the collapse of all these Western-friendly governments that we prop in place. So is there even if you take out all of the non-American influence, right? Take out all the Zionist influence, the Jewish influence into U.S. foreign policy, take all that out, and wouldn't what's left, like the John Mearsheimers, I would argue is what's left. I mean, how could they extricate themselves without, having colossal ramifications for Western imperialism? I mean, it just seems untenable. Like both parties are have to support Israel. The Zionists and the Jews, but also the Western imperialists have to support Israel. The cynical Western imperialists that don't really care about the state of Israel, don't really care about the state of Ukraine. The cynical, American firsters that want to maintain and perpetuate U.S. global hegemony, they could never, extricate themselves from the Middle East without, wrecking the whole enterprise, the whole empire. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I would, I mean, I would put the question back to you. I mean, the one thing I'm not so sure about, though, I suppose it's true or it's possible. I mean, because I know that prior to, U.S. support for Israel, my understanding is that it really accelerated under Nixon, like after Golda Meir met with Nixon, and that's when at least in terms of like the budget, the amount of money sent to Israel really, where there was an agreement made that you are now going to be the outpost in the Middle East. And I think prior to that, there was sort of a division within like the military industrial complex or the U.S. intelligence community, as far as like there were elements that preferred the the oil-rich Gulf monarchies, like they preferred the Arab countries to be the sort of primary outpost. And I think that some of this kind of came to a head with like the 6-Day War, and obviously like what happened with the USS Liberty. But my understanding is that prior to that, there was like division as far as like ultra Zionists versus, the big oil, like faction of the ruling class that wanted to, be closer aligned with the Arab countries, because obviously support for Israel, even for the Gulf monarchies, I mean, they publicly oppose Zionism. We all know that they're crypto Zionists, but at least outwardly, they're supposed to be opposed to Zionism. And so my understanding is that there was a shift that took place historically. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but so I guess my question to you is: do you really think that, like, just because, like, say it gets to a point where the U.S. has to abandon Israel, strategically, like because it's just such a pariah, do you really think that would have like a domino effect? Because the U.S. would still have, Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, all these countries, these oil companies disguised as nations. I mean, they would still have their proxy in the Middle East, really. I mean, both Saudi Arabia and Israel, were creations of the British.
Well,
and after the war, the United States, especially after the Suez Crisis, the United States became the big superpower with influence in that region. The British were out of there by the end of the 50s. So, like, I don't know, like, I'm not so sure that the fall of Israel would be necessarily tied to the collapse of support for, I mean, I know those countries are not democracies by any means. Obviously, the populations living under them, obviously they don't agree with the tacit support, these countries normalizing relations with Israel, like with the Abraham Accords, all these Arab regimes. I'm not sure that their populations would probably agree with that, but it doesn't matter because they're not democracies. They're absolute theocratic dictatorships. So I guess I'm just not so sure that the U.S. wouldn't be willing to drop Israel, because they do have those, client states like Egypt, like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess what I'm asking is what makes you think that would happen?
Well, so we're quibbling about, the degree to which that defeat would jeopardize, things. And I think the defeat would be catastrophic, right? And it would lead to the domino effect, but maybe not. But it would certainly be a huge defeat, and it would force the West to really change their policies. But I think it would empower, of course, the axis of resistance: Iran, Iraq, even people within Egypt, and then Lebanon. And I mean, I think the weakest place is probably Jordan, but also those little Gulf Arab monarchies are very weak too, because they don't have any kind of an army or really anything. They're just a few rich families with a whole bunch of indentured servants from Indonesia and stuff. So
That's true.
I don't know. I would think that it would be unconscionable for the West to allow themselves to be defeated in that way, and so they're just going to go all in. And this gets back to that question about, is it Israel, wagging the U.S. tail? I don't think so. I think it's the imperialists that are all in on this, with or without, the Jews and the Zionist benefactor, the Christian Zionists and all the other supporters of Zionism. I think, basic imperialism 101 necessitates support for Israel. But what do you think, Carlo?
No, I think that the entanglement of the roots of Zionism and Israeli foreign policy in the U.S. economy, in the U.S. political system is too deep to ever separate the two.
Yeah,
I think if you were to separate the two, they'd both die.
Wow.
It'd be like they wouldn't have the flow of ideological nutrients
yeah, and
the
South
money.
Africa was different in that regard, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the fact that when the Nakba began to take place in 1948, there was nothing. I mean, I was around I wasn't politically aware in the 50s. I was a kid, but not till the 60s. But I wasn't aware of the Nakba until, God, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It was a hidden thing and not brought out. I mean, I knew about kibbutzes. I knew about kibbutzes in the 50s because when I had to get my father was a barber, and when I had to get my requisite haircut every 3 weeks, that I'd sit down and read magazines, and you read about kibbutzes and how really basically like socialistic, if not communistic, arrangements that they had, sharing housing, sharing meals, sharing work, just like all the European utopias from Fourier on down, whatever you want to talk about. So and that had to be like just a piece of minor propaganda, given what you've got now.
Yeah, I mean, the core of Zionism, has always been, we want the largest geographical area with the largest Jewish majority possible, and it's ever expanding. They haven't declared their borders. They continue to expand, and all these ideologies are kind of ways to sell it, right?
Yes.
And so they would sell kibbutzism to the lefties. They would sell, Zionism to people who identified as Jewish. And I guess to the right wingers, nationalism. It's Jews
and those kibbutz,
Israel for Jews. Yeah,
they were. Yeah. It was like a selling point to the left, but without pointing out that those communes were to the exclusion of the indigenous Arabs, who were not allowed to be part of them. So there was, it was a racist form of socialism. Yeah.
But we have to ask ourselves: with the advent of BRICS and the success of BRICS, and other elements of the Chinese economy, forever, whatever you want to talk about, the Russian obvious victory in Ukraine, is this showing a kind of weakness on the part of this utterly symbiotic relationship between the United States and Israel? Because it's certainly showing it's showing a deep moral weakness in Israel, just indefensible. But what about the U.S.? And it could bring us to the subject matter. I hate to change it. We don't have to change it right now, but it could bring us to the Epstein situation. Because that's the level of morality that the upper class, whatever you want to call them, the filthy rich, have always operated at, and I mean throughout U.S. history, it's been that way. And no matter how much it's been, like most countries' histories, been sanitized. It's always been down and dirty. Really, it's always been kill them for that. Yeah, kill them for the land, kill them for the gold, kill them for the oil. It's always been at the root of it. Now, is the U.S. beginning to show that kind of fatal weakness, where it's willing to go down with Israel? I mean, it certainly has gone down. It's my sensibility is it's gone down somewhat in the general population's estimation of what it can do. Now, I'm not talking to everybody. I'm talking some Americans. Some Americans are starting to pick up on this, and the Epstein situation is accelerating that kind of exposure, as the whole Trump presidencies have actually done, because of the way he operates within that context. I mean, let me just
go ahead.
When have you seen so many memes where they show Donald Trump, they show people around him moving off of him because of his smell or because he shat his pants? When have you seen that? You haven't. And the fact that not only some journalists, some of the journalistic community, but many who have access to computers like this are doing their own memes and showing it. That kind of disrespect, that kind of, no, there's no awe here. That might be a sign that it's beginning to crumble, that the U.S. is beginning to fall apart. I'd like to think so.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. There's just this convergence of things happening, but it really kind of seems that the political elites aren't interested in trying to get support. It's like they're telling us they don't need our support, and they're going to be able to continue doing what they want to do, whether or not we care, whether or not we know what they're doing. And I want to make the point too that it's really not anything new. The United States has engaged in genocide for its entire. It was founded on genocide. It has continued to engage in genocide. We've got the Korean War, where we introduced biological warfare on that in North Korea. Not a single building was left standing that was over like 1 story tall, right? In North Korea. And then Vietnam, very similar things. I mean, we tried to destroy the jungles of Vietnam so they couldn't hide. We literally dropped, chemicals to destroy the jungle so they couldn't hide under leaves. Like, it's diabolical. And then in Indonesia, we killed over 1 million leftists, just outright murdered them. I mean, over 1 million people, like a total genocide.
Speaking of documentaries that get into the incredible psychology behind carrying out a genocide, in regard to Indonesia, I don't know if you've ever seen The Act of Killing, but that's,
yes, I know you do.
Incredible film, because it also has this meta narrative, because basically, if you haven't seen the film, I don't want to spoil it, but these documentarians, they go to Indonesia and interview veterans of the military regime that carried out that genocide of communists. And the subjects only agreed to be interviewed if they can reenact their crimes on camera, fictionally, obviously, because it also, the whole movie takes on this meta narrative about Hollywood, and because they want to play themselves doing the genocide that they carried out. I mean, and the U.S. supported that. So, The Act of Killing, very good documentary.
They're proud of it. They're proud of the killings they did, and of course the U.S. Through John Martins, I think his name was, an attaché at the time, admits to giving the Suharto forces a list of people to kill, a list. It's and then you go on to some more, and you kill 250,000 more people.
I want to assume that Barry O's family was involved in that, since he was a schoolboy in Indonesia during that time. I think it's pretty likely that his family was involved in that. But which kind of explains why they knew they could trust him as president, because he's such a evil turd. No, I saw that documentary. Really great. Yeah, influential documentary. And it's crazy. So genocide, it's just nothing new. But I don't think we've ever seen a genocide exposed as open and as widely and as in your face as this one. At the same time, they do try. The media tries to ignore it and pretend like it's not going on. Even though it is so in your face on social media, so where do we want to go from here? Okay, Epstein. So we were going to pivot to Epstein. I mean, it's a very similar thing. It's like everybody knows about it. Everybody's talking about it. But they're just not interested in giving any transparency, right? They're fine to let us speculate, and they're even fine if the Democrats want to use it for partisan advantage, or if and certainly Trump, in the lead up to the election, tried to use it for partisan advantage, but never any hope of real transparency, kind of like the JFK assassination, because if there's real transparency, both parties, I should say both wings of the Uniparty, are going to be exposed. And so who was the guy? What's the guy's name? He blocked the bill saying that we're going to expose it. Johnson.
Yeah.
The House. Yeah, Johnson.
So how does he get away with that? I mean, other than they own it all. They own the media. They own the political parties. They own all the politicians. They own the judges. They own the the intelligence agencies, and they own the courts. But
procedure.
Yeah, I see the same thing happening, obviously, like the Democrats who, the same people who were saying that the whole Epstein thing was a conspiracy theory just a couple of years ago are now using it as a political football against Trump, because he is clearly, I mean, it seems very obvious that he's implicated. I mean, his behavior even, I was saying this on social media, like during Russiagate, he never appeared flustered because I think he knew that nothing would stick. He knew that it was
bullshit.
More about, undermining at least his rhetorical efforts to recalibrate, if there was going to be one under him. I'm not even really sure, but like he had made rhetorical statements suggesting rapprochement with Russia. And I think he knew that the investigation was more about, damaging his political credibility as far as like the election win and undermining any foreign policy moves he might make. He was basically pressured into taking a hawkish stance against Russia, which he did. But I don't think he ever thought that, he would really go down for anything related to that scandal. But with Epstein, he is acting guilty as hell. He is acting like his behavior, his, going on his Truth Social and telling his own followers, just gaslighting them, saying that this is all an invention of Obama and the Democrats, when, his campaign staged these PR photos where they were handing out binders saying that they were going to expose the Epstein files on day one when he got elected. I mean, just treating his own followers like they're completely stupid when this is one of his biggest campaign pledges. He's behaving as if he is guilty, like he's in those files, and that this is a scandal that could take him down, because it could. I do think he could be made the fall guy. There's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that would like, I don't know how they're going to do it, but I could see them somehow making this about Trump as opposed to, the very bipartisan implications of the whole Epstein blackmail operation, assuming that there was one, which it seems painfully obvious that there was. And it is bipartisan. I mean, there's two living U.S. presidents that are clearly implicated in it. Politicians and people in the media. I mean, there's been big scandals at like the Museum of Modern Art because people on the board, like Leon Black, prominent business people have been implicated in this. This runs deep throughout all kinds of American institutions, education, the government. So to make this about Trump is sort of like pretty, I think he could be made the fall guy. But I don't even necessarily think that's going to happen because I think the public does understand that this is bipartisan. The fact that his own followers are pushing back against him on this, they're not going along with his attempts to gaslight them. People who were instrumental in terms of like his election victory, in right-wing media, they're not letting it go. This is bigger than him. This is bigger than MAGA. I think that it's, there's a lot of people waking up about the real nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship on the right even. So I think that this is sort of part of the whole crisis of American imperialism where it's sort of realizing its reality, it's what it actually is. And it is so wrapped up in many other things like the U.S. relationship with Israel and what Israel's doing in Gaza and the sort of, unprecedented level of control it seems like the Israeli government has over U.S. foreign policy. I mean, in regard to Mearsheimer, Mearsheimer, obviously, I think his book and his work on the power of the Israel lobby, is unparalleled. But I do tend to agree with, I don't think that, what he says about Israel as far as like being sort of bad for U.S. policy. I think that's sort of a naive, Israel is used by the U.S. It's a proxy at the end of the day. Yes, it has. It's a complicated issue, but I don't think it's purely as simple as, Israel dictates U.S. policy and that it just needs to get rid of it, and then suddenly American interests are in line with, it's real goals. I just think that that's very naive, and he's very naive on a lot. He's a realist. International relations scholar. I don't look to him for, my overall worldview. I think he's very good at dissecting geopolitical realities. But I think that he's still very much a liberal. He's
he has scathing criticism, and that's about as far as he can be appreciated. But and then on
there's
China,
a lot of limits to him.
I really want to know because he said on numerous occasions he thinks that the U.S. could contain China rather easily, and I want to hear how he thinks they could do that because he always has an answer, but I've seen him go that far in interviews where he concedes that we're doing the right thing by trying to contain China. Israel is keeping us from containing China. Ukraine is keeping us from containing China. We need to pivot to contain China. And I think we can do it.
So he considers China an expansionist power?
Does he?
Yeah.
No, you gotta. No. So he would
contain them from what? Doing what?
In his whole worldview that he understands, realism. It's a security competition, and as the hegemon, the United States needs to secure itself by containing China. And so we don't want to allow China to become a regional hegemon in Asia, like the United States is a regional hegemon in, America. That would be a defeat for our security. That would be.
If he's trying to suggest that capitalism inevitably drives, competing countries into whether they like it or not, facing off for competing interests with one another, I agree. But the whole basis of, the U.S. Western containment policy, George F. Kennan, he admitted himself, and I forget what the name of the memo is, but it's very famous where he talks about their resources.
Yeah.
It's about, so the U.S. containment policy is an imperialist one. So by its own admission, by its own, statecraft or strategists, so unless he acknowledges the imperialist nature of, which I'm sure he probably does in part.
That's what's dangerous about Mearsheimer. He does have scathing criticisms of our Ukraine policy, of our Israel policy, but that gives him street cred. And then when he argues that we need to contain China, that's why he's dangerous. That's why he scares me. And that's why we need to come against that idea. But Sachs is a good liberal also. Mearsheimer and Sachs, both liberals. Sachs says it's not a zero-sum game. We can have a win-win relationship with China. China's great. We need to work with them. We don't need to contain them. And so they have this running, difference. But again, I've just never seen Mearsheimer explain how. He's asserted that we could contain China. He would never come on our 3-person viewership podcast. But maybe I get someone else to ask him that question to just explain how it is possible to contain China. I would like to see that. But Carlo, sorry.
What about? No, go ahead, Carlo. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. I just want to say, as far as Mearsheimer is concerned, and that got a lot of criticism actually from our site the last time we treated him, is he's a Western cynic. He believes that China's expansion into the global South with BRICS is on the same level, on the same tier as the U.S. imperial hegemony around the world, and that suddenly China's going to pop out of Xi is going to pop out of a cake and go, you're under us now. You belong to us.
No, he projects our own evilness onto China, which is the problem.
Exactly, yeah. And just to go back a little bit, about AI too. When it comes to it's interesting. I forgot in what context, but anyway, this article that you sent along, Billy Bob, from the Greenville Times.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember quite what I want to say about it, but years ago I began studying what they called at the time strong AI, which was John von Neumann's self-reproducing automata, Alan Turing, Newell, and Simon. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. And Marvin Minsky, who has squandered billions of our dollars pursuing strong AI. That is AI that mimics human behavior. He's been spotted on Epstein's plane.
Huh? Really?
I thought it was interesting.
So, Max, Carlo is engaged in a little bit of self-promotion because our last episode on Tuesday, Patrice at the Greenville Post, put our discussion up there, but he just put the URL of the discussion into an AI chat GPT notes or something.
Which and they got a lot of it wrong.
Gave a real long, lengthy, tremendous analysis of the discussion, which was spot on. And so we're just amazed at, what AI is capable of doing. But yeah, so I guess one of the heavy investors was a good friend of Epstein.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, who isn't at this point? It's funny though, because in my experience with AI, like I started a small podcast recently myself, and we, for convenience sake, we've been using like the AI summary on Zoom, to like provide a synopsis of the discussions we have. But every single time I have to go through it and make corrections because it will take something out of context. It'll focus on something totally irrelevant.
Interesting.
It's pretty primitive. I mean, I don't know. This is probably a much more sophisticated AI system, but the one that comes with Zoom and some programs, it's like you better be careful because it will get stuff wrong. I don't recommend using it without double checking that it's gotten everything first, because it's not that reliable in my experience.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I had some comments and thoughts on your idea that Trump might, just take the fall for Epstein and then everybody else gets off the hook. I'm thinking that, that would be a threat to get some concessions from Trump, right? They would definitely use that as a threat. And so then it's like, well, Trump has found himself in this very bad situation where, he can initiate World War III, maybe he can, nuke Iran, or he can, take the blame of, being the sole pedophile that Epstein was selling all of those sex slaves to. I mean, that's a tough situation for Trump to be in. I don't know which way he would go, honestly.
Well, don't you think that they would rather have Vance in there? Because, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I do think that they'll try and use it as leverage. I think they probably already are, which which sort of explains a lot of Trump's, going back on his campaign pledges with regard to Ukraine, numerous other things, where he's reversing course. I mean, I do think that they could use it as leverage to get him to cave on several things, but I don't know. Like, I think if the Epstein thing, if the public really demands transparency and maybe some kind of, I don't know, equivalent of the church committee or something like that. I mean, I'm not optimistic. That didn't really happen after 9/11. 9/11, they had a total Warren Commission-esque, investigation.
Yeah, no, Church Commission and Warren Commission, two different kinds of things.
Yeah, I don't know. I would hope, but I mean, to me, it does not seem like Epstein's going away. It seems like it's really made its way sort of into the public consciousness in a way that they're not going to be able to just get rid of it. It seems like the Kennedy assassination, like 9/11, it has that sort of, people want to know. They don't believe they're being told the truth about this, and I think that it could potentially take Trump down, especially with the way that he's handling it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Yeah. Like, this Epstein stuff comes out and he's like, well, I better resort to culture war BS and put out a bunch of tweets about, the Washington Redskins getting their name back. I mean, and people were not buying it. There was people, I mean, people are not falling for this. So I think, I don't know. I hope the pressure holds. And especially as long as Israel's in the news, with what it's doing in Gaza, more and more people are realizing that the Epstein thing is not just about some individual guy blackmailing the U.S. government. He was doing this on behalf of a state actor. Alex Acosta, the attorney general, or the attorney for the Southern District of Florida at the time, said he got that sweetheart deal and was told to back off because he was intelligence. Or at least he was told by somebody that he was intelligence. I've seen people debating that. And then of course he's later Trump's Secretary of Labor. I mean, this is not going to go away anytime soon. I don't think.
I saw today, somebody was posting a newly revealed birthday greeting that Trump gave Epstein about something about secrets. It's like, happy birthday. It's great to keep secrets or something. It was.
Well, I mean, there was video circulating, I guess, from like 2010, which is long before Trump ever ran for president. With Epstein, there's very little footage of him speaking at all. Most of it is him pleading the fifth. But there was widely circulated video that resurfaced of him being asked about Trump, his socializing with Trump, which he says, yes, of course we knew each other, as everybody knows, they knew each other. Then he's asked, did you socialize with Trump in the presence of women under 18 or girls under 18? And he pleads the fifth,
Yeah, no, I saw that too.
So, like, I think this stuff is not going to go away. That's just my...
He didn't just plead the fifth. He pleaded like several amendments, I think.
Yeah, he invoked several privileges, and it's very obvious that I think Trump, made a huge gamble. He knew this was something that was being used by his base to get elected, but they rather foolishly did not anticipate how tied up he was in this, and I think it's going to come back to haunt him. I
now
don't know.
remember when a large, faction, the prominent faction within the intelligence community was using this idea that Donald Trump has been identified and he's been like managed by Russian, secret intelligence to be like what's that called, a Manchurian candidate,
Yes.
a Trojan horse within the. What if those brave intelligence officers knew the whole time that when they said Russia, they were meaning Israel, but they just couldn't say Israel openly?
Well,
I like to throw conspiracy theories out.
Well, it's funny, I believe, the whole Steele dossier with the water sports and the all this stuff that Steele,
Oh, shoot. I was waiting. I thought he had a long pause. Sometimes Max will pause.
Oh,
but
sorry.
yeah, it looks like it froze up a little bit.
Here we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So my opinion,
last thing we heard was water sports.
where Christopher Steele got that from was in the late 90s. I mean, the story is of how Vladimir Putin worked his way into Boris Yeltsin's inner circle. Was in the late 90s, he was the head of the KGB before he was appointed to be prime minister. And, this was at a time where Yeltsin had really fallen out of favor. And there was, his approval rating was had plummeted. And basically he was notoriously corrupt. There were all these, there was threats that they were going to investigate him, and there was for his corruption, and there was a special prosecutor, I guess, that was appointed in Russia. And this, I don't know if this is true, but the story is, it was reported at the time that Putin and the KGB the KGB's successor were surveilling this prosecutor, and the FSB discovered that the prosecutor was engaging in acts with several prostitutes, and then sent the video to the Russian media, and then this prosecutor that was supposedly going to take down Yeltsin was instantly discredited, and the case against Yeltsin was dropped. And that's how supposedly Putin curried favor with Yeltsin, and then he was appointed to be prime minister. I don't know if that's the full truth of the matter, but that's where I think Christopher Steele, got this whole idea about Putin ascending to power and using sexual blackmail to and surveilling people to get what he wants. That's where that comes from.
Yeah, no, that's
but it has
interesting.
absolutely nothing to do with Trump. And obviously, the idea that Trump, I don't know when they say he was there and they would have done this to him. It's just bullshit. Trump didn't run for president until 2015. Is Putin clairvoyant and can see into the future that he's going to do this? It makes no sense. So yeah, that's where I think that whole BS came from. Just having done a lot of research into Russian politics and Putin myself. That's the story of how Putin got into Yeltsin's inner circle before he became president.
I had heard a story that Putin was with a group of nationalists that were really dismayed at what Yeltsin was doing and how he was a disgrace to Russia and the Russian people, always appearing drunk and always just slavishly, first of all, being put in power by the Western coup, but then just by deferring to them so slavishly on all the policies, that they just told him, you need to appoint me or, you're going to die and your family's going to die. And Yeltsin said, okay, but who knows?
Yeah, That I don't know.
I like that story. I like it.
It sounds
maybe it
pretty
might not be
cool,
true.
but I've never heard that. But I mean, I suppose it's possible. I mean, I think Putin is a little bit more clever in his maneuvering than quite so overt, but you never know.
He's a good manager. He's been able to pick up the pieces and develop a coalition and to improve things tremendously and make Russia a strong power. And a lot, the people's lives have improved tremendously. And of course, he renationalized the oil and natural gas sector, which.
But that overt that nationalistic aspect to him, that didn't really come out until later. At least that's my understanding. I mean, in his initial years, he was sort of naively trying to court the West, and he had very naive aspirations about Russia even potentially joining NATO. Even though from the very beginning of his presidency, it seems like they made him a marked man. I mean, there was the whole Kursk submarine incident that a lot of people think like the West had something to do with that. That was a big challenge for him right away when he was president, his very first year. And then, as I've written about, the support for the terrorism, the Chechen separatists. I mean, yes, on paper, Bush and Putin were supposedly getting along, but it seems very obvious to me that they had other plans for Russia, and they didn't fully trust Putin to be a pliant puppet like Yeltsin.
Yeah.
And once he made that abundantly clear, pushing back against the NATO expansion and then calling out the U.S. for supporting terrorism, I think that that's when he may have always harbored those feelings about, Russia being humiliated and needing to return to the world stage, and that Yeltsin, yes, he talks about it now, like how he saw the corruption, he saw, how the West, and he pointed out in a recent BBC press conference I saw, where a BBC reporter was talking to him, he was saying, Yeltsin fell out of favor as soon as he criticized the NATO bombing of Serbia. When he was a drunken buffoon doing whatever the U.S. wanted, they had no problem with him. But as soon as he stepped out of line, that was it for him.
Okay, last topic before you have to run. Okay, so you wrote a lot about Chechnya. You're very familiar with the Georgian war. And recently, of course, the United States tried very hard to get a puppet government in Georgia, and that effort has failed. And now it just really seems that the West is moving their focus onto Azerbaijan, which is right next to Georgia and right in the middle of Russia to the north and Iran to the south. And of course, that corridor is very important for Russia and China as a trade corridor, future economic things once we have peace. But what could you want to give us some insights about the importance of Azerbaijan and what's going on? Or is that too long? Is that too long? You have a Cliff's Notes version?
I think. Well, long story short, it's incredibly complicated. But going back to the 90s, I talk about this in my articles on Chechnya somewhat. The Caspian Sea basin was identified as, a key strategic, resource in the new great game between the U.S. and Russia. And Russia was really considered, a competitor, even still regarded as a competitor, even after, the Soviet Union fell. And, there was people like Peter Dale Scott have written about this. There was a very, the coup that put in the Azeri government, there was, the Azeris really play both sides, with Russia and the West. And obviously the I mean, Armenia too. I mean, Armenia, there was there was that color revolution a few years ago, and now I understand they're, it's they're doing things that are perceived as very pro-Western. You know, the U.S. is hell bent on, through all these various color revolutions, going back several decades, trying to pull these countries into the Western sphere of influence because they want access to their resources. And one of the ways they do that is supporting all these color revolutions. And, the coup that put the current Azeri regime in power that's been there for years was very strategically important with Brzezinski and the pipeline, Baku Tbilisi, pipeline. And it's an area of very strategic importance. And, that's been part of the whole Western encirclement of Russia. I mean, they say that, I've seen some people say that the amount of oil that's actually there is not as much as they had anticipated. And that's one of the reasons they ended up, going into the Middle East with Iraq and Afghanistan. But, these are pipeline wars, ultimately, many aspects to them. So, and yeah, I mean, there have been a number of, Georgia is just one example. I mean, there's been, meddling in the elections in places like Romania and, numerous other places. Moldova, yes, yeah. I've written about that as well. This is still going on. The West is still meddling in these countries' affairs, and it's all about, these multiple theaters of proxy conflict with Russia. Some of them have reached a point where they've broken out into outright war, like with Ukraine, but in these other places, like Georgia, it's still, there was a brief war, I think one of the shortest wars in the history of modern warfare. It was like 4 or 5 days in Georgia in 2008. But, that was, there were the separatists there that wanted to join Russia. But since then, it's been this back and forth, meddling in their elections, trying to ensure that there's a pro-Western candidate and one that isn't want close relations with Russia.
I'm trying to pull up the Thai-eating Saakashvili, where he didn't know if the Russian tanks were going to stop or if they were going to just go to Tbilisi, and so he was behind his
Columbia
desk.
University educated, totally Western puppet. I mean, it's funny, when he fled Georgia, he should have been charged with war crimes for the artillery shelling of civilians in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. But actually, it's funny, after he fled the country, he was living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, the hipster mecca of Brooklyn for several years. And then he magically reappears in Ukraine, and Poroshenko appoints him to be
an honorary Ukrainian,
a governor of Odessa Oblast. No connect. I mean, no. He's Western educated, from Georgia. He just gets appointed to this post in Ukraine. Now I think he's in prison somewhere or something. I'm not even sure.
Well, he had to flee Ukraine, and then he tried to force his way back in. There was a big scene.
Yeah.
But so Armenia and Azerbaijan, had a conflict at the beginning of the special military operation. Russia allegedly was trying to guarantee the security of Armenia, but Azerbaijan initiated a war and kind of took over some of their land, right?
Yeah, well, there's been, Azerification going on for years. I mean, they have many disputed territories. I think that the regimes there play both sides. But prior to the SMO in Ukraine, there was a big fight between or reignition of that conflict in I believe it was in late 2020. Between the Azeris and Azerbaijan over Artsakh. And, all this goes back to, decisions made under the Soviet Union. I mean, a lot of it goes back to the Stalin era, and, there were territories that were partitioned, that didn't align with what, the different ethnic groups that lived there. And, of course, when the Soviet Union later collapsed, the tensions between the different groups, claiming sovereign right to each respective territory came to a head. I mean, this happened all over that Russia's near abroad.
Yeah.
And one of the hot spots for this was
Russian enclave of South Ossetia and
yeah.
What's that big place they have in Europe? It's like a whole separate block that's considered Russia. Kaliningrad?
Kaliningrad. Yeah.
So and we got European politicians threatening Kaliningrad. So
it's a sitting duck. I mean, it's a sitting duck. I'm surprised they haven't done it already. But
I don't know. I mean, aren't they worried that Russia's going to retaliate with, if not Oreshniks, like if not nuclear strikes, at least Oreshniks. But I mean, their military doctrine would suggest they could use nukes, and so I think that's a deterrent. But I don't think the West ought to be even talking about it, because that's just an escalation, escalatory. But it's funny that you would say that you can't believe that the West hasn't already tried something. And I'm like, I can't believe they're even suggesting trying something, since that would mean the end of the species. But, who knows?
Well, there's several places. I mean, Russian troops, I wrote about this. Russian troops are also sitting ducks in Transnistria as well. So, there's numerous places, where they are vulnerable and surrounded by hostile forces, because they were peacekeepers in certain places when all these conflicts broke out after the Soviet Union collapsed. Kaliningrad, I'm not too knowledgeable about, admittedly, and I don't know the intricacies of that enough to comment. But it does seem to me like it just territorially, it's in a vulnerable position.
No,
but
and then
obviously the prospect of something like, Russia changing its nuclear doctrine, these non-proliferation treaties getting thrown out, some of them set to expire in the next several months, I think, or early next year. The U.S. doing things like clearing the way for B-52 bombers to carry nukes now. I mean, this is getting very dangerous. So, I mean, I was hoping with Trump, some of it would de-escalate, but now that I guess you can kiss that goodbye. So I don't know. But yeah, this is just going to keep happening. I mean, the specifics of the Georgia election meddling, I'm not entirely sure, but it seems very similar to what they've done in several other places, just, not acknowledging the will of the people, that in these countries that do want to stay in close relations with Russia, and putting the most hostile, pro-Western regimes in power. And, the Azeris, what's his name? Aliyev, his father was, they try to play both sides, but Aliyev, his father, I think, pivoted the country away from Russia and began the whole Azerification of Nagorno-Karabakh. And that's not coincidentally when there was a pipeline that was constructed that really linked the Caspian Sea from Azerbaijan, I believe, to Turkey, and it running through Georgia, and it became a very, the oil-rich region, the South Caucasus, really became a key pivot area as far as pulling the region and its plentiful resources away from the Russian sphere of influence. And Brzezinski was intimately involved with that. And it all goes back to that, these developments that are happening now. And, the Azeris, I think, try and play both sides, but it's a pretty pro-Western government. I mean, Armenia is now too, since the Velvet Revolution that happened. But historically, Armenia and Russia are inseparable, especially having the same religion. So, and they've always been the protectors of the Armenians, in that part of the world. They saved them from the genocide. So I think that no matter what kind of Western puppet regime, Pashinyan came to power there, they're still very intimately and spiritually connected with Russia. That's not going to be easily severed just with, a color revolution. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, Mohammad Mirandi said the same thing about Azerbaijan as in reference to Azerbaijan turning anti-Iranian. He said they're playing with fire. That's a dangerous thing to do, and Iran has tools and leverage that they can use.
Yeah,
but that definitely seems like the new point of Western imperialism is to capture politically Azerbaijan and then use it against Iran and Russia.
Yeah, I mean, they're nominally Shia, which is strange, but Azerbaijan is also weirdly close with Israel as well. So it's like,
yes, yeah,
as well as Georgia. I mean, Georgia, Israel was very much involved in supporting Georgia in the 2008 war with Russia. I'm not quite sure why, but I'm sure there's somebody with better knowledge of geopolitics than myself could give an explanation for that. But yeah, no, the Azerbaijan, Iran, I mean, that's clearly like the West is trying to drive a wedge there, because they share the same.
You think the West would be willing to sacrifice Azerbaijani blood in their interests, or maybe Moldovan blood? Or do you I think Max froze again and he wasn't able to laugh at my joke. But it's, of course, you're back now. You're back. But no, of course they would be more than happy to sacrifice, those countries just like they sacrificed Ukraine. And I think that might be, the course that this conflict will take. Are they going to take the L, or are they going to double down and go for, an escalation on different fronts?
Well, I mean, as long as all these disputed territories, whether it's Ukraine, Artsakh, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, like all these, just Transnistria and Moldova, all these places, as long as they're there, since the free market was reinstated in that part of the world, Putin is not going to be able to resolve these conflicts. The whole reason that they didn't have these problems under the Soviet Union, whatever anyone wants to say about it, was because they had equal representation. There was a federation where they were all, there was a nationalities chamber where they were all represented. They were able to live in relative peace and harmony, as a multi-ethnic federation. And of course, as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, all these places became areas where the West could attack the soft underbelly of Russia and use it to weaken and undermine them, and make the weaponization of nationalism, the different nationalities, and it's just Putin is not really going to be able to resolve any of this. I mean, he's able to do the best he can. But ultimately, it's always going to be a way for the West to.
Yeah.
I mean, Putin is pretty masterful at negotiating it and keeping it from. I mean, the fact that these territories have remained disputed for 30-something years now, and it's sort of a thing where a powder keg goes off every couple of years, and then it sort of dies down a little bit, but that threat is always going to be there, and it's always going to be an area where the West can exploit and undermine Russia's interests. And there's just an innumerable amount of areas in that part of the world that are in territorial and ethno-national dispute. And yeah,
it'll be interesting, I mean, to see what comes after Putin, if, we're going to have Medvedev, or if the Communist Party can step up and, get more support, get more popular. But yeah, I've always criticized Putin for, it's like Russia for Russians, and I'm the leader of all the Russian people, wherever they are, the Russian people in Transnistria, the Russian people in South Ossetia, and that's who I'm, representing. I'm going to support, and they're not going to be persecuted. Well, I mean, that just dealing with that ethnicity is a little bit bothering, because, that same thing can be weaponized against you, just like you're saying. And so it's much better, to, talk in terms of, unity and morality and justice and, anti-imperialism. We're united against Western imperialism, not necessarily on our ethnicity. But anyway, it's tough. Yeah.
I mean, the Communist Party, I mean, I don't know how true it is. I mean, I do think that Putin has an incredible level of public support. He consistently polls above 70%. But they do say, at least, I don't know about nationally, but at the local level, there is a lot of corruption, and the Communist Party alleges a lot of vote rigging and stuff that they really should be doing better. I don't live in Russia, so I can't say. I'm not an election observer. It does seem like Putin is legitimately elected to me, but at the local level, it does seem like there's probably a lot of messing with the vote. I mean, this is what the Communist Party and Zyuganov allege. So, I mean, they should have come to power in 1996, but the West ensured that didn't happen. There's a lot of nostalgia for the Soviet Union. Whether they're ever able to come back to power, I don't know.
Something they were just recently trying to rehabilitate Stalin with some major legislation. I don't know if it passed or if it was just being presented by the Communist Party, but on Facebook recently, I saw something about, they're pushing some policy that will go a long way to rehabilitating the undermining of Stalin that, started, of course, right after his death with Khrushchev and the secret speech and all that bullshit. Max, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. So I've linked to Max's second article in the description on the Chechnya War, and always look for his work at Covert Action Mag, right?
That's correct.
And you got a new article hopefully coming out in August on, you mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I wrote an article on, for those who aren't familiar, there's a big conservative figure.
Horowitz.
His name is David Horowitz, who died in late April. For those who aren't familiar, he, despite being a mentor to people like Stephen Miller and a crazed ultra-Zionist conservative, he used to, in the 1960s and 70s, he was actually a prominent member of the New Left and was an editor at the legendary Ramparts magazine. He was also raised by old school Communist Party members. And so I use his biography, his political trajectory, to sort of make a commentary on like the history of the New Left and various periods in history. I kind of use his personal biography as like a launching pad to get into all these different things, including Khrushchev's speech, actually. His parents were Communist Party members until that speech was made. And like many people, they left the Communist Party USA after that speech came out. And he ended up rebelling against his parents and becoming a member of the New Left in the 60s, which of course was, I mean, really the New Left, if you look at it historically, came out of the fallout from that speech, and then also the response to the Soviet intervention in Hungary. And that's really kind of like when the complete break from the Western left and the Soviet Union happened, and that's when you get the new left of the 1960s. So I just kind of use his personal story. He later ended up
Turn
becoming
on, tune in, and drop out, Max. It's all you got to do.
I mean, he was also involved with, the Black Panthers, and then there was an incident that happened where a friend of his he claimed was murdered by the Panthers. That started his turn to the right, and basically, I get into the whole mystery surrounding that murder, which is still unsolved to this day. I believe it had something to do with. I'm not sure if it was COINTELPRO or Operation Chaos, but basically the woman who was running the Black Panthers at the time, who succeeded Huey Newton, was a lot of people believe, other Panthers believe, was a government agent. So I sort of, her name was Elaine Brown. So I sort of get into, the history of COINTELPRO and stuff like that as well. But, he kind of, his whole turn to the right is kind of weird too. So anyway, that's coming out in August, Covert Action Magazine. If people
The article's done. We're waiting for it to get published. And you can link to it on the link in the description, and then just hit Max Parry's name, and all of his work that he's published there show up. I've discovered that firsthand. Max, thank you so much. We will see you guys next week. Bye.
Take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.